About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. A little girl of 10 years old always used to wear her hair in 2 braids. She never took them out. Her mother had made her wear that same braids for almost 3 months without untying them for sleeping or brushing for even washing. The girl began complaining to her mother after some time that she had a headache. Her mother brushed it off, thinking that she had just bumped her head, and sending her off to bed in her braids. The next morning, the girl complained again, but her mother ignored her again. This continued for around 2 weeks, until one morning when the little girl was about to leave for school. She told her mother that her head was hurting, but she just sent her to school, believing it to be a cry for attention. That afternoon, the girl was almost in tears as she told her teacher she had a terrible headache. Her teacher thought it was because her braids were too tight, and so took each one out and let her hair fall loose. She was shocked to see that a spider was living in the girl's hair and had hatched its eggs. The hatchlings had been eating the girl's scalp. She was rushed immediately to hospital but died soon after from an infection in her brain. I was making rhythm with my fingers while I was anxiously looking at outside. The weather was rainy all week. Never stopping rain stopped at last. My husband Joe and I were at home for 2 days and we were really restless. I needed some fresh air. I looked at the clock. It was 23:48. Joe was reading a book in the living room. While I was wearing my jacket, I said to John, "I'm going for a walk." He gave up the book and looked at me. "But it is too dark." He replied, "I really feel suffocated and I need to take a breath. Fresh air will make me better." "Do you want to come with me?" I said. "No thanks. It's too late to walk." He said and added, "I think you shouldn't go too." "Why are you going out now?" "Anyway, you'll go out tomorrow morning." I insisted. "I really need fresh air." My husband unwillingly confirmed as he knew my stubbornness. "Don't worry, I will not be late," I said, and I went out as sending a kiss. I went out, and I breathed the fresh and cool air. The weather was dry despite raining a lot. Before starting to walk, I stopped and waited for my eyes get used to darkness. A few minutes later, I started to run to leave the energy and problems behind me that I kept in myself. When I arrived city center, I slowed down. The scene that I know was strange for me. Streets were silent and dark, like completely abandoned. There was no light in none of the shops. Actually, in this time, anywhere wasn't open, but nevertheless, there must be the lights of the cars going or some open shops. I felt strange. There was something different. I realized that I should have listened to my husband. But I was a stubborn person and I didn't listen to him. Suddenly, I heard a shrill and scaring scream making me get rid of the thoughts. It was like a help scream. I couldn't decide what should I do. At last, I decided to go back home. I heard the shrill, scaring, and jarring scream again. I wanted to go back home as soon as possible, so I sped up my footsteps. I was feeling like someone was following me. I sped up more. I realized that I began to fear when I heard the shrill scream again coming from the woods next to the empty street. Actually, I was a brave girl. Sometimes I used to go out alone at nights and I wasn't scared. But this event made me nervous. While I was thinking about this, I was almost at home. There was no light. I thought John fell asleep. I heard the shrill, scaring, and jarring scream again when I came behind the iron-barred door of the house. I quickly turned back and looked around. I backed towards the door. I felt the coldness of the iron bars on my back, but I was feeling something different from the coldness of the iron-barred door. This was hotness of the breath I felt, and that voice, "You should have stayed at home." It was a nice day. Helen got up early and had breakfast. It was Saturday, so she needn't go to work. So she decided to watch films at home. She went towards bookcase. She found the box that had films in for choosing a film. While she was having a look in it, she found a note. "Watch Bloody Knife." She thought she noted it, so started to search for film named Bloody Knife. At last, she found it and started to watch. This film was about a little girl. That girl had a lovely family. But her father was deceiving her mother. The little girl learnt it and killed his father with a knife. Her mother saw her while she was killing her father, so she committed suicide with the same knife. But later that day, nobody saw the little girl. Everybody says the soul of the little girl was following the people who watched that film. This was the subject. In the end, there was a writing. This is a real story. Be careful. If you watch this film and ignore it, her soul can follow you. But Helen ignored it and decided to watch another film. All day she watched film. When the evening came, she went to bed early. It was around 2:12 and Helen woke up suddenly. She turned on the lights. She was shocked. On the floor there was blood. She examined herself, but there was no harm on her body. She followed the blood stains. At the end of the stains, there was a knife with blood like in the film. Helen began to afraid, so she decided to call Philip. Philip was her best friend, that's why she wanted to call him. But she couldn't find her mobile phone and cable of the other phone was cut. She was really afraid. Suddenly a noise came from the kitchen. He went towards the place where the noise came. In the kitchen, there was the little girl in the film, and she had a knife in her hands. It was bloody. The little girl said, "You mustn't have ignored the writing." And she threw the knife towards Helen. Knife came into Helen's heart and she died. I was afraid of darkness since I was a child. I don't know why, but I thought something would come from darkness when I was alone and I was terrified. So, I was sleeping at nights, not closing the lights. The day was Friday. That day, both my mother and father were on duty. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a doctor, and they were working at the same hospital. My mom called our babysitter Susie for looking after me and my sister. Because they weren't at home, my sister Vanessa loved Susie. But I didn't like her, and I was nervous for she'd stay here with us. It was around 21:09. I was watching film on TV in the living room. Susie went upstairs for putting Vanessa to bed. I heard some noise upstairs. I thought my sister didn't want to sleep, so she was running in the room. I continued watching film. Suddenly the electricity went off, so I was afraid a lot. I immediately rushed my room and took my blanket over my face. I heard footsteps. I thought Susie was coming here to check me. The door of my room was open. I didn't want Susie would know that I was afraid of darkness, so I decided to behave like I was sleeping. I took back my blanket a bit over my face and looked at Susie. Suddenly my eyes slipped left side. Froze. My sister Vanessa's dead body was on my table and I saw Susie. She was writing something on the wall with my sister's blood. When she finished that, a bit moved to left side and turned to me. When I looked at the writing that she wrote, "I wanted to die. I know that you didn't sleep."